Spiritual awakening is not supposed to be peaceful. The lie of the peaceful awakening. Everyone tells you that spiritual awakening is supposed to feel amazing. You meditate, your chakras open, angels sing, and life becomes this endless stream of gratitude and inner calm. Right? Except, if you're watching this, chances are yours doesn't look like that. Maybe your enlightenment playlist has been replaced by late-night Google searches like, "Is panic part of spiritual awakening?" Or, "Why does meditating feel like rebooting Windows 95?" If you thought enlightenment came with angel choirs, but are now convinced you need a full-body exorcism just to fall asleep, congratulations, you're in the right place. You're sleep-deprived, your chest feels like it's hosting a drum line, and you're starting to suspect that peace comes with a side of emotional demolition. It probably feels more like emotional demolition, like your insides decided to stage a revolt and forgot to send out a memo. You're anxious, disconnected, and maybe even terrified that you're doing spirituality wrong. Your ego's basically having a nervous breakdown while you're here, trying to breathe through it like a nervous yoga instructor. But what if that's actually a sign you're doing it right? The biggest myth in modern spirituality is that awakening equals instant peace. We've been sold an image: smiling yogis on mountaintops, pastel Instagram quotes, voices whispering, "Just surrender." It's comforting, but misleading. Awakening doesn't give you calm. It strips away everything that isn't real, so that calm can eventually find you. Before that happens, the ego, your psychological structure built from memories, identity, and beliefs, has to fall apart. And the truth is, that process doesn't look spiritual at all. It looks more like chaos. Most people expect awakening to feel like expansion, but it starts as contraction. Your nervous system tightens, your mind races, you start questioning every choice you've ever made. The world feels both intensely alive and unbearably foreign. That's not failure. That's biology reacting to the collapse of illusion. You're not malfunctioning, you're rebooting. See, when people say they lost themselves during awakening, it isn't poetry, it's literal. The psychological scaffolding that kept everything predictable starts to crumble. You begin to see where your thoughts came from, the fears you've been running on autopilot, and how much of your personality was actually a defense mechanism. The old, "you can't survive that realization," and it panics. That panic is mistaken for spiritual regression, but it's actually the ego's death rattle. Here's the thing nobody likes to mention. Peace isn't the entry ticket. It's the residue left after honesty burns everything false. At the start, awakening feels raw. You cry without knowing why. Old sadness resurfaces. Relationships crack under invisible tension. You swing between ecstatic clarity and complete numbness. These mood swings aren't spiritual deficiency, they're detox. You've lived with layers of emotional armor for years, and awakening dissolves them, leaving your system exposed. And because we live in a world obsessed with control, that exposure terrifies us. We reach for affirmations, rituals, anything to shove the discomfort back down. But suppression is the exact opposite of awakening. The spiritual path was never meant to protect your ego. It was designed to dismantle it. Awakening asks you to see every thought, fear, and illusion you've used to avoid truth, and to do it without flinching. Psychologically, this is no small thing. When the ego structure begins breaking apart, it triggers the same stress pathways as a trauma response. Cortisol spikes, sleep patterns collapse, and the brain scrambles for stability. This is why even people deep into meditation suddenly experience anxiety or depression. Awakening destabilizes the old neural patterns, so new ones can form. But in that gap, it feels like standing over a spiritual black hole. So if you're trembling, emotional, or questioning your sanity, you're not broken, you're between worlds. The calm you were promised comes later, once the storm has cleared everything false. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that very chaos is the sacred part. The cleansing fire that makes peace real instead of performed. Here's the quick version before we go deeper. Awakening feels like emotional bankruptcy before the actual wealth kicks in. You're not failing. Your nervous system, ego, and identity are just breaking up with each other, and it's messy. Keep that in mind as we move through the stages. Because awakening isn't a day at a spa, it's demolition followed by rebirth. Think less scented candles, more psychological construction zone. The peace you seek doesn't come through escape, but through surrender to the unraveling. And in that surrender, you'll start to recognize something deeper than calm, a quiet knowing that survives chaos itself. Remember this as we move forward. The panic, the confusion, and the exhaustion aren't proof you're failing. They're the trail markers that say you're actually on the real path. If you came here expecting incense and enlightenment, welcome to Demolition Day. That's where we're heading next. Away from the fantasy of bliss, into the reality of what actually happens when the ego begins to collapse. The shock of awakening. The first real sign you're waking up isn't bliss, it's confusion. Everything that felt solid starts to shimmer like a mirage. You know your name, your job, your story, but none of it feels like you anymore. It's as if your mind has been quietly rearranged overnight, and now you're walking through a life that technically still fits, but feels off, like trying to wear shoes a size too small. This moment of disorientation is what many traditions call the initiation. It isn't punishment, it's the first crack in the mask. Psychologically, this phase is brutal because the ego, our identity structure, exists to maintain stability. It's built from memories, social conditioning, and routines that tell us who we are. Awakening dismantles those foundations. Suddenly, the automatic pilot switches off, and you realize you don't know the manual controls. The nervous system freaks out. Your mind works overtime, trying to rebuild certainty, because that's what it's wired to do. That resistance, that inner trembling, is not a failure of awakening, it's the proof of it. Once the nervous system senses instability, it activates survival mode. You might notice your heart racing for no reason, muscles tensing as if you're preparing for danger. It's because your brain interprets ego collapse the same way it interprets physical threat. When identity starts to dissolve, the amygdala, your emotional alarm bell, fires non-stop. Cortisol rushes in, and suddenly you're lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if you're losing your mind. But what's really happening is that old neural circuits tied to fear and control are flashing before they fade. Think of it like a software reboot. The old operating system was cluttered with outdated programs, beliefs you inherited, roles you never questioned. Awakening hits the restart button. First, everything freezes. Then the familiar shortcuts stop working. You press the keys you always used, people-pleasing, busy schedules, self-improvement goals, and nothing happens. The frustration you feel is the system uninstalling what doesn't serve you anymore. And yes, it feels like chaos because your identity was built on those very commands. When that crash hits, the symptoms look physical and emotional at once. Anxiety spikes out of nowhere, appetite changes, waves of dread, or crying spells you can't explain. Sleep might swing between insomnia and exhaustion. The mind keeps scanning for meaning, asking, "What's wrong with me?" The answer is both terrifying and liberating. Nothing's wrong. You're just no longer anesthetized. Awakening removes your psychological numbing agents. The raw data of your life finally becomes visible. And of course, it's overwhelming at first. Let me be clear about this. The dark night phase doesn't mean you're cursed or spiritually weak. It's a nervous system detox. All the suppressed energy, the grief, shame, and fear you tucked neatly away to function, awakening releases it. You might feel like you're regressing, like your personal growth is unraveling. But regression is just what progress looks like when the scaffolding falls off. It's the nervous system recalibrating to hold more truth. I once worked with a client, let's call her Maya, who described her awakening as a panic attack that lasted 6 months. She had meditated for years, studied every positive thinking book she could find, and then one morning she couldn't stop shaking. She couldn't sleep, her body buzzed as if plugged into a socket. When we unpacked it, what she called breakdown was actually the release of years of suppressed anger and grief masquerading as serenity. Her system was learning how to exist without repression. That's the shock of awakening. It forces honesty into the bloodstream. Here's where most people get stuck, trying to go back. They think if they meditate harder, journal more, or raise their vibration, they'll get back to the peace they had before. But the peace from ignorance and the peace from truth aren't the same species. The first is comfort, the second is clarity. And clarity burns at first. When everything familiar falls away, the ego scrambles to rebuild its old nest with new feathers. It says things like, "You're not ready," or "You're regressing." Don't listen. The old self will bargain, threaten, or guilt trip to survive. Let it panic. That panic is sacred noise being cleared out. Biologically, this chaos has purpose. When neurons that fire together stop firing together, the brain's wiring reorganizes. Researchers studying neuroplasticity note that periods of mental breakdown often precede bursts of creative insight or emotional stability. It's because the old synaptic connections dissolve before new ones can form. Awakening uses that same biological law. The dismantling prepares you for a wider bandwidth of awareness. You can't upload a new operating system without erasing the old code first. If you take nothing else from this section, remember, panic isn't proof of regression, it's proof of rewiring. When the system shakes, it's clearing cache, not crashing. But what about the fear? It feels endless, doesn't it? That hollow sensation in your chest, the sense that you've been unplugged from reality itself. The trick is realizing fear isn't your enemy. It's the security alarm of dissolving illusion. It's not warning you of real danger. It's alerting you that false safety is disappearing. When you interpret fear this way, it becomes an ally. Suddenly you can breathe through it instead of fight it. The breath becomes an anchor when everything else feels like quicksand. If you're in this stage, give yourself permission to not know who you are for a while. Identity confusion is the compost that births authenticity. The harder you clutch the old definitions, career, relationship roles, even spiritual person, the more painful the process. Awareness doesn't eradicate discomfort, it gives you context for it. You start recognizing emotional chaos, not as punishment, but as information. Each anxiety spike points to an illusion breaking. And here's the strange beauty. After every storm comes a tiny flicker of calm, but not the old calm. It's quieter, humbler, as if life is whispering, "See, you didn't die. You can let go again." That's how you build nervous system trust. Not by suppressing emotion, but by proving through direct experience that the tornado passes when you stop running from it. So if it feels like your entire inner world is being bulldozed, good. That means truth is moving in. The temporary mess is your psyche realigning itself with something more authentic than comfort. And when that inner storm hits full force, understand this. It isn't destroying you. It's bringing to light what's been buried under the noise of who you thought you had to be. Whenever you catch yourself thinking, "I can't handle this," remember, that's just the old ego shouting its last defense before silence returns. The confusion, the sleepless nights, the strange sense of being reborn into chaos, all of that is the shockwave of awakening doing its work. Let the system shake, because underneath all that trembling is something indestructible waiting to be seen. When that inner storm hits, what it's really trying to show you is what's been buried all along. Ego death and the dissolution of the old self. The collapse of the ego is one of the most terrifying and sacred parts of awakening. It's the moment when the story you've told about yourself starts to unravel, thread by thread. For years, that story gave you stability. "I'm this kind of person. I want these things. I believe this is how life works." Ego death rips those definitions away, leaving a strange vacuum where identity used to sit. Psychologically, that vacuum feels like free fall. You're awake, but there's no you to wake up as yet. Most people assume ego death is some mystical enlightenment switch, but in practice it feels like grief. You're mourning an entire lifetime of identities: the achiever, the victim, the caretaker, the rebel. These roles once made sense of the world. As they burn away, there's confusion and sorrow, because even your pain used to define you. Without that scaffolding, you feel naked to existence itself. It's not that you've lost your mind. You've lost the framework your mind used to navigate reality. And when the compass disappears, the psyche spins. From a psychological point of view, ego death is the brain's confrontation with uncertainty. The portion of your mind that filters experience through memory suddenly realizes its data is obsolete. The neural networks that maintained me no longer produce a coherent narrative. That's why you feel derealization or disconnection. It's the brain trying to reboot without its old coordinates. Imagine deleting the operating system while the computer's still running. Every function glitches because the identity process itself is being rewritten in real time. This dissolution hits deep because the ego wasn't just mental. It built emotional habits too. Think about how anger gave you control, or how sadness made people care for you. Even survival patterns become part of identity. When awakening dismantles them, the nervous system protests. It says, "Wait, we've always survived like this." But the new consciousness refuses those contracts. You're asked to live without manipulation, without defense, without the familiar drama that validated your existence. On a nervous system level, that's the equivalent of quitting an addiction cold turkey. Grief enters here as the body's natural adjustment mechanism. Tears, melancholy, nostalgia, these are emotional detox symptoms. You're releasing your old personality, the way a snake sheds its skin. The sad part is, the ego doesn't see it as renewal. It sees it as death. That's why awakening feels violent at times. You're not just letting go of thoughts. You're dissolving emotional anchors that once kept you alive. It's no wonder people describe this phase as dying before you die. The self-image collapses, and yet consciousness watches it happen, powerless to stop it. You start noticing how every certainty used to cushion you from the rawness of being. The belief that life has a plan, or "I know who I am," was your psychological warm blanket. When awakening strips that away, reality hits unfiltered. Sounds are sharper, silence heavier, emotions louder. It's both breathtaking and unbearable. Many retreat at this point because the ego cleverly rebrands itself as spirituality. It says, "You don't have to feel this, just transcend it, just rise above it." That's how the illusion sneaks back in through the back door. And that's where spiritual language can betray us. Words like oneness and serenity become traps when used too early. They make you chase peace instead of truth, using meditation as an escape hatch. Integration demands the opposite. It asks you to stop running, to sit with the mess and see it clearly. The so-called ego death isn't about annihilating personality. It's about seeing through the fiction of control. Real awakening doesn't delete the self. It liberates awareness from the self. The difference sounds small, but living it feels like crossing an ocean without a boat. The mind will bargaining during this crossing. It might whisper, "Okay, maybe I can keep the spiritual identity instead. I'll be the awakened one." That's ego wearing a new outfit. It would rather survive as a holy persona than dissolve altogether. Watch for this. Recognition is key. The temptation to cling to your new truth as another shield is an old reflex. This is why many seekers get stuck in what's called spiritual bypassing, the endless self-improvement loop that feeds the very ego you're trying to dissolve. So how do you navigate ego death without collapsing into nihilism? First, acknowledge the grief. Let yourself miss your old simplicity. It's okay to long for the comfort of ignorance. Every radical rebirth includes nostalgia. Second, understand that uncertainty is not failure. It's the birthplace of authenticity. Once you stop demanding that life give you fixed meaning, you start noticing presence itself is enough. Meaning stops being a product of identity and becomes a quality of awareness. That shift is the essence of awakening. Not finding something new to believe, but realizing the believer itself was the illusion. Here's the strange paradox. As you loosen your grip on the self, you begin to feel more real than ever. Life no longer revolves around performance, but participation. You laugh more freely, cry without shame, love without agenda. The very things you thought would vanish with ego death, personality, creativity, connection, return purified. They're no longer motivated by survival, but by expression. That's how stillness begins to appear, not as a forced calm, but as the natural rhythm of being undefended. In this phase, everything that once defined you can vanish overnight. Friendships shift, goals dissolve, even your taste in music or food can change. It's eerie but necessary. Existence is erasing false signatures to reveal the original script underneath. The personality that once felt like you was only an interface. Underneath it, consciousness was waiting untouched. When that realization dawns, fear turns into reverence. You stop needing to control everything because you finally trust the process that's been dismantling you all along. So if you feel like you're disappearing, know that disappearance is exactly the point. Ego death doesn't end you. It ends the resistance to what you truly are. It exposes the illusion that life was happening to you, when all along you were life itself, pretending to be a person. Once the ego dissolves enough, the shadows it kept hidden finally crawl into the light. And that's where the next phase begins. The slow and beautiful work of meeting everything you once rejected, face to face, without turning away. Entering the shadow, the moment the ego collapses, the floor of your psyche gives way, and everything you've buried down there starts climbing out. This is the beginning of shadow work, the confrontation with the parts of yourself you swore you'd never see again. The concept of the shadow, popularized by psychologist Carl Jung, isn't mystical fluff. It's the psychological label for everything your conscious mind rejects. All the anger you weren't allowed to express, the jealousy you disowned, the selfish impulses you buried under politeness. The shadow isn't trying to ruin your life, it's trying to be included in it. When awakening tears open the doors of the unconscious, those hidden fragments storm your awareness like uninvited guests. You start saying things you didn't know you felt. Old memories resurface with emotional charge you thought was healed. You might even feel like you're possessed by moods that don't belong to you. That's because for years they didn't. They lived behind the mask collecting dust. Now they want airtime. Your job isn't to judge them, it's to witness them. because the shadow only becomes destructive when you refuse to look at it. Psychologically, denial is a survival strategy. We all repress traits we learned were unacceptable. Maybe your parents punished loud emotions, so your rage went underground. Maybe vulnerability was mocked, so you armored with sarcasm. Over time, your mind built a split identity. One side polished for social approval, the other side exiled in silence. Awakening dismantles that split. It dissolves the dam that kept those waters contained. Suddenly, qualities like envy, arrogance, or lust, once hidden, surface in grotesque honesty. It's disorienting because you thought enlightenment would erase flaws. Instead, it magnifies them until you see through the shame attached to them. And that's the hard truth. You can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. The shadow phase is a psychological composting. Every repressed feeling breaks down into fuel for growth. But the decomposition smells awful at first. You'll face projections, moments when you see your buried characteristics reflected in others. Maybe you notice someone's arrogance and feel intense disgust. That's your own unowned confidence, projected out to avoid confrontation. When you're aware of projection, every irritation becomes a mirror. It's humbling and infuriating, but this is how awakening retrains perception from judgment to understanding. During this phase, relationships often act as catalysts. The people closest to you mirror the parts of yourself you've yet to accept. One day you might feel profoundly connected to someone, the next triggered beyond comprehension. That oscillation isn't chaos, it's integration in progress. When the unconscious unpacks itself, the nervous system interprets each revelation as danger because it challenges identity. You might dream of old lovers, abusive parents, forgotten friends. The psyche replays unresolved dynamics, asking, "Can you hold this now without flinching?" Each dream or conflict is an invitation to withdraw your projections and reclaim lost energy. Here's the paradox. The more light you develop, the darker your shadow appears. Illumination doesn't remove darkness. It just lets you see it. Think of it like adjusting brightness on a photo. The higher the exposure, the clearer every flaw becomes. Many seekers mistake this visibility as regression. Why am I more triggered than ever? Haven't I worked on this? The answer is precision. You're finally perceiving subtler layers of patterning that were invisible before. Healing deepens through repetition. Each emotional recurrence loses intensity until it integrates naturally. Self-compassion becomes your lifeline here. Without it, shadow work turns into self-punishment. You can't bully yourself into integration. Shame just builds another layer of repression. The key is radical curiosity. When jealousy arises, ask what it's trying to protect. When rage erupts, locate the boundary it was defending. Every difficult emotion carries intelligence. The more you allow space for that conversation, the faster the tension dissolves. Think of emotions as children tugging at your sleeve. They only scream because you ignore them. The body also participates in this unveiling. Because emotions are stored somatically, shadow emergence often manifests as physical sensations. Tightness in the chest, nausea, trembling limbs. You might think you're sick, but your body is simply metabolizing old feelings. Breathing through these sensations, rather than analyzing them, accelerates release. Modern trauma research supports this. Stored emotion requires bodily processing, not just intellectual insight. When you pair awareness with breath, the nervous system learns that safety exists even while processing intensity. This is the bridge between psychological theory and spiritual practice. The moment awareness meets embodiment. In my own experience, the shadow phase felt like emotional whiplash. One morning I'd feel profound gratitude. By evening I'd be angry at humanity. My instinct was to suppress the unspiritual parts, to meditate harder or chant it away. But every attempt at forced peace only made the chaos louder. The breakthrough came when I stopped treating discomfort as failure and started treating it as feedback. Suddenly, every trigger became a teacher, every argument a mirror. The drama didn't vanish, but I stopped seeing it as proof something was wrong with me. It became proof something true was surfacing. Another common misconception is that shadow work means wallowing in darkness. It doesn't. It's about presence, not indulgence. Observing your anger doesn't mean acting on it. It means understanding its roots, so it no longer controls behavior from the back seat. Integration happens when you can recognize a pattern mid-trigger and choose differently. Not because you should, but because you see clearly. Awareness replaces compulsion. That's what maturity looks like in awakening. Emotional responsibility, not emotional repression. The spiritual trap here is what I call the healer identity.